You're listening to the Bleav in Giants podcast with two-time Super Bowl winner Carl Banks and the voice of the Giants, Bob Papa.
Welcome to another edition of Bleav in Giants presented by FanDuel. I'm Bob Papa. Carl Banks continues his world travels as G3 Apparel and Starter are all over the planet. Carl getting ready for Super Bowl week. But a lot to talk about. It appears that Eli Manning is not going to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. The stunning news of Bill Belichick reportedly not getting into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Giants and John Harbaugh putting his staff together. A lot of things to cover, a lot of ground to cover, and who better to talk about it and join us from The Athletic, longtime friend Ian O'Connor, who was in on everything as far as the Giants coaching search was concerned. Ian, thanks for joining us here on Bleav in Giants. How are you, my friend?
Hey, great to see you, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much ground to cover. Let's start with the Eli Manning part of all of this. According to reports, he is not going to get inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I'm not really that surprised by it, quite honestly. Your thoughts on the fact that the two-time Super Bowl MVP is going to have to wait another year?
Yeah, I would vote for him without question, Bob. I can understand the other side of the argument. Eli is a bit of a complicated case because in his career, he only won playoff games in the 2 years he won Super Bowls in, but he did beat the greatest coach and greatest quarterback of all time twice in Super Bowls. And to me, that's the tiebreaker. And I think he'll eventually get in, but I wouldn't be surprised if he has a bit of a long wait here because there's a backlog with the modern era candidates. And they really need to revamp the voting system to allow more players to get in. I think they toughened up the voting standards in recent years, in part because players like Deion Sanders complained about some guys getting in that maybe weren't elite. And so I think once those standards are eased, which I suspect will happen quite shortly, Eli's chances will go north. And ultimately, I think he'll get in, but it's going to be a bit of a process for him to get there.
Yeah, and I warned everybody here at the Giants, like when they were getting all excited about Michael Strahan, and I said, don't be shocked if he doesn't get in on the first ballot. I mean, I'm good friends with Shannon Sharpe, and I was with Shannon Sharpe in Tampa when the Super Bowl 43 was happening. That was his first year of eligibility. I think it was the same first year of eligibility for Chris Carter, and at the time of Shannon's retiring, he was number 1 or 2 in every statistical category for tight ends, and it took him 3 years to get in because, as you mentioned, there's a logjam first and foremost, and then you get the jump the line guys, right? Drew Brees jumps the line based on career resume. You know, Tom Brady is a jump the line guy. Peyton Manning is a jump the line guy. So you got Larry Fitzgerald. So all of a sudden, guys that get to the final 10 every year that automatically get to the final 15. Well, when there's jump the line guys, that takes 2 spots away, and now you're only voting on 3. So it's pretty tough, and I think Eli's going to have to wait a little bit.
Yeah, and look at next year, Bob. You have Gronk, you've got Richard Sherman, you've got Whitworth, who might have to wait. But Gronk and Richard Sherman, and there might be 1 or 2 other guys, and you have some holdovers like Vinatieri, who I think should be in as well. And it's tough. I think that the Hall of Fame, you look at this year, and I know we're going to talk about Belichick at some point, but when you have voters who want to vote for 5 candidates in that category that's separate from the modern era players, it's the senior players, coaches, and contributors. You have 5 finalists. You're only allowed to vote for 3. I don't know why. If you think all 5 are worthy, why can't you vote for all 5? And Belichick would be in if that were the case. Some of those standards need to be relaxed. And 80% for the Pro Football Hall of Fame needs to come down to 75% like baseball. I'm a voter on the baseball end of it, and not in pro football, of course. But I think that if they can relax some of these standards, and some very deserving people like Eli Manning will eventually get in.
Yeah, and listen, I went on a big rant on my Sirius XM NFL radio show the other morning, and I've been ranting against the Hall of Fame for years. I mean, remember, George Young, he waited all of those years because he was actually lumped in. That's before they even made it somewhat more digestible. He was being lumped in with modern day players. Like, how do you decide you're going to cast your vote? And then they kind of streamlined it. They went contributors and they started adding owners, and then they had the veterans committee. But to me, it's absolutely insanity that you're asking a voter to pick between a player, a coach, or an owner. They all need to be separate categories. Like, think about this. Mike Shanahan's not in the Hall of Fame. Mike Holmgren's not in the Hall of Fame. Tom Coughlin's not in the Hall of Fame. Bill Belichick is now not in the Hall of Fame.
That's right.
Dan Reeves should be in the Hall of Fame just based on his career wins, taking 2 different franchises to Super Bowls. And then you have the case of Marty Schottenheimer, who never got to a Super Bowl, yet somehow Don Coryell is in. And I'm not trying to knock Don Coryell, but like, all these guys won a lot more games, won championships. Marty Schottenheimer is the outlier in this argument. But, you know, something has to be, like, get rid of the backlog. Is there any doubt that Tom Coughlin, I'll just go with the Super Bowl winners, Holmgren, Shanahan, and Coughlin, aren't slam dunk Hall of Famers?
No, and those 3 are better than coaches already inducted. And now, with Belichick back in the mix next year, that creates another year of waiting for at least one of those candidates, if not 2. And so it becomes a real problem. Pretty soon, Andy Reid will be in the mix, and you just keep pushing guys back. And it's a very difficult situation. There's no way. How do you compare Ken Anderson, who I loved growing up as a kid, measure his career against Robert Kraft, or L.C. Greenwood against Bill Belichick? It doesn't make any sense to do that. There should be separate categories for senior players. If you want to put coaches and contributors in one category, that's an easier game to play and probably a fairer one. But to have the senior players in with Belichick and Kraft this year was ridiculous, and frankly was one of the reasons responsible for the greatest embarrassment in the history of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And now they have to deal with that.
You know, one of the writers went on record, and I'm going to get his name because he writes for the Kansas City Star, Vahe Gregorian. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a story today in the Kansas City Star as to why he did not vote for Bill Belichick. And I understand his reasoning, because when you get these senior players that make it to the front of the line through the gigantic funnel, there's no guarantee that these senior players might be involved in the conversations the following year, because every year people are making new cases for guys who have gotten lost in the shuffle, and you don't know who's going to get through that funnel to get into the room for that final 3 conversation, or to get to that final 3. So he was a big Ken Anderson fan. He was shocked when he became a voter. This is what he wrote, that Roger Craig wasn't already in the Hall of Fame. And the same with L.C. Greenwood. And his reasoning was, Belichick's going to get in, but like, these 3 guys might not even make the conversation next year, and they all belong in the Hall of Fame. So he says he voted for those 3 players. And it kind of speaks to the silliness of what the Hall of Fame did by having all this lumped together.
It really does, Bob. And listen, Vahe Gregorian, he's one of the nicest guys in the profession, and a great columnist. He is. I don't agree with his reasoning. I like you do. I understand it. But what I would have done in that situation, and I wasn't in that situation, is I would have picked the best 2 of those 3 players. Maybe sacrificed Robert Kraft if I had to, though he's been to 11 Super Bowls since Jerry Jones was in his last Super Bowl, and Jones is in the Hall of Fame and Kraft isn't. That's amazing to me. But if he had to sacrifice Kraft, that was a little more understandable. You can't sacrifice Belichick at the altar of anything. He's gone to he went to 12 Super Bowls. He won 8 of them as an assistant and head coach. And you just can't do that. So pick 2 of those 3 guys. Pick Greenwood and Craig, or Greenwood and Kenny Anderson, and then pick Belichick. That's what I think you had to do in that situation. I think what happened, Bob, is you had, and Mike Sando of The Athletic did a great job laying this out. You had 2 or 3 guys do what Vahe did. Then you had 2 or 3 guys say, I think Spygate is a 1-year penalty, so I'm going to make Belichick wait until next year. Then you had other guys saying, well, Belichick's going to get in, so I'm going to reserve my votes for other people because he doesn't need my vote. And then you added that up, it added up to 11 or 12 people who kept him out of the Hall of Fame. So obviously that can never happen again. They need to separate these categories and allow the committee members to vote for more people. There's no reason why you could only vote for 3 of those contributors, coaches, and senior players as opposed to 5 if you felt all 5 were worthy.
Right, and all 3 of those senior players have already gone through multiple layers of voting to get to those final 3. So, I don't understand why they can't be voted in. You know, the other thing that's interesting, you wrote your column in The Athletic about Spygate, and I was listening to Tony Grossi on the radio, and he's been covering the league for a long time. And he did mention that the Belichick conversation went on for about 45 minutes, and Deflategate wasn't really a factor. Belichick's press conferences and the way he treated the media and the press conferences wasn't that big a factor, but they did talk a lot about Spygate. And Tony even admitted, he's like seriously, like we're talking about Bill Belichick for 45 minutes and we're talking about Spygate. Like, why? We're going to look like idiots with this thing.
Right. Spygate is worthy of being brought up in the discussion, certainly. He was caught cheating, and that is part of his historical record forevermore. But the way I look at it is with my baseball vote, I have voted for Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, but I have never voted for any other player tied to PEDs. Why? Because I represent the BBWAA when I cast my ballot. The BBWAA has honored Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds more than any player in the history of the sport. 7 Cy Youngs, 7 MVPs, and never stripped any of those awards from those 2 guys. Plus, if you look at career WAR, that measurement of greatness, they are 2 of the top 8 players of all time. So I separated those 2 from the other cheaters, if you will, and I did vote for them and not the other guys who used or were accused of using steroids, where there was a lot of evidence that they did. And I just think you have to raise the bar on people who break the rules. And if they hurdle that bar, I mean, and Belichick does it by a country mile, it shouldn't be a big part of the discussion. It should be 5 to 10 minutes. I was told it was longer than that. And it's just like he overwhelmed the Spygate case without question with all the Super Bowl appearances, the division titles. If you look at his career, Bob, and you take away his first 3 titles in New England, he keeps the 2 as an assistant with Parcells, of course, and the Giants. And you go forward from when he was caught, first week of 2007. Just go forward from there. And that's his entire career. He'd have 3 Super Bowl championships, 6 Super Bowl appearances, I Bleav 9 AFC Championship game appearances, and I think it's 12 division titles. That's if you strip them of his first 3 with Spygate, right? That is a slam dunk Hall of Fame career. So that really should have been a 5-minute discussion. Okay, let's have this conversation. Let's understand that it's part of his record. We need to at least bring it up and then move on to the greatness. And obviously that didn't happen.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And you could even throw in the Super Bowl appearance as a member of Parcells' staff with the New England Patriots, right? I mean,
correct. Yeah.
He was part of that staff as well. So, you know, I have a real problem with this stuff because I advocated for Dan Reeves for a long time, and then he got sick. And, you know, I know his family pushed really hard because, you know, you don't want this stuff posthumously. And I'm thinking about like Coughlin, and I'm thinking about Holmgren, and I'm thinking about Shanahan. And now with Belichick being tabled for a year, it's like, if you're going to keep this system and you're only going to potentially put one of these guys in per year, well, some of those guys might not be with us. What's the point of that? What is the point of making these? They should do a flush, and next year they should just put Belichick, Shanahan, Holmgren, and Coughlin in and just eliminate. I know they're worrying about the speeches and the telecast and all that other stuff. There's a way to massage it. There has to be a way to massage it where you can have a bigger program, but still make it fit into TV, and maybe forget about some of the other nonsense they put in the telecast, and just clean this up. Because what Tom Coughlin did, and this is not because this is a Bleav in Giants. How many coaches ever have taken an expansion franchise and been in the conference championship in year 2 and year 5?
Yeah, that's amazing. People forget his work in Jacksonville. It may not have ended the way he wanted it to, but he did unbelievable work in Jacksonville to get there that quickly. And I remember when he brought a Jacksonville team right to play the Parcells Jets in the playoffs, and Keyshawn Johnson had that Jim Thorpe type of game, and the Jets win and move on. But yeah, that gets forgotten. It's not only the 2 conquests of the Belichick machine in the Super Bowl. Tom deserves a lot of credit for what he did in that first head coaching job with an expansion team, without question. So I think next year, the year after, to have a huge class and get some of these people in makes all the sense in the world. Too much sense for it to actually happen. But you're right. And to me, if you had like Belichick and Coughlin entering in the same class, that is a good thing. Brings more attention to it, more eyeballs to me on the telecast, more people in the live audience, more fan bases engaged, and can't wait to see it. What is Coughlin going to say? What is Belichick going to say? Yeah, I think the Hall needs that, and they overcorrected. They overreacted to players. I don't want to pin this on Deion Sanders, but Deion was one of the guys who were outspoken about there are too many people getting into the Hall of Fame. Well, guess what? Now there are too few people getting in, and it's created this backlog, which is dangerous. And you're right. You want to honor people when they're still on the planet, and it's still meaningful to their families if they're not, but it's not the same honor, certainly, without question. So listen, the Belichick embarrassment this year, which again is the greatest embarrassment in the history of the Hall of Fame, that actually could turn out to be a good thing along the lines of what we're talking about right now, because that can never, ever happen again. So I think you will see significant change in the coming months. I do.
You know what's crazy too is for all of his public press conferences and everything else, right? When the NFL did the 100-year centennial celebration, he was on the blue ribbon panel. He was the one in the studio on all those shows. Like, you wrote the biography. Like, this guy is as passionate about the history of the sport and the game itself. I mean, it's almost bizarre to me to believe that someone that loves the game and the history of the game as much as he does would be denied that place in history this year.
Yeah, I know that, for instance, when Don Shula in his later years was quoted calling him Belichick, that really hurt him, because Shula is an historical figure in the league and was a friend of his father's, and really the historical standing and the fact that he said that really hurt Belichick. And frankly, one of the reasons why he really wants to break that record if he gets another shot in the NFL. I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Yeah,
but
not after 10 openings and his name not linked to anybody.
That's correct. So that's probably off the board, but his legacy is secured. He doesn't need any more wins in the NFL to enhance his legacy. And you're right. He is a student of the history of the NFL without question. That was ingrained in him by his father, who, of course, was a lifer assistant at the Naval Academy. Bill growing up around his heroes, Roger Staubach and Joe Bellini, another Heisman winner at the Naval Academy. And Roger Staubach was my hero too. So I can just imagine what it was like to be at Navy practices with Staubach running around and running that offense. And so he has an incredible respect for NFL history, and he just made it. He made a piece of history with this fiasco that he wanted no part of. And frankly, when Wickersham and Don Van Natta broke that story on ESPN, I almost fell out of my chair, to be honest with you. I just thought it was such a slam dunk. I just couldn't conceive that as a possibility, and yet that's exactly what happened.
Well, hopefully the Hall of Fame doesn't dig in, and sometimes people want to prove that they're right by digging in as opposed to admitting that we better make a change. I want to go back to the Eli Manning thing just quickly. Look, I was there every day. You covered a lot of it. First of all, the fact that the injuries that he played through with that consecutive streak that was stopped because of Ben McAdoo, not because of Eli Manning and injury. And then watching him play, even in that playoff game in Green Bay in 2016, if the wide receivers catch footballs, the Giants might have been up 17-0 after the first quarter. That was like Eli dealing like it was 2011 again. But I always feel like the franchise really cost Eli Manning a smooth trip into the Hall of Fame. The bad drafts starting in 2012, 13, 14, the worst defense in the history of the Giants statistically, the 2015 team where Eli was throwing it all over the place. And Coughlin had to break from his principles as a coach and gamble at the end of games, trying to go up 2 scores, throwing it when he should have been running it, not kicking field goals, trying to get touchdowns because he knew his defense couldn't stop anybody. And all those bad draft picks and then some of the dysfunction. Like when Eli Manning was handed his second Super Bowl MVP, he was 32 years of age. Like the next 4 years should have been nothing but winning. And they didn't win they didn't lose because of Eli Manning. It was what happened around him and the bad drafts that I feel bad for him when it comes to that part of his career.
You're leaving out the 08 team too, which is the best team they had in the Eli Coughlin era, where if he has that third ring, obviously if the Plaxico Burress incident doesn't happen, Tom Coughlin told me this on the record. I actually couldn't believe he said this on the record because, as you know, Tom doesn't say things like this. He said we would have won it in 08 and we would have repeated. We were ready to do that. And, of course, we couldn't recover from the Burress shooting, the accidental shooting. So there's that ring that was left on the table. And then, everything crumbled around Eli. I remember standing next to him backstage at that second Super Bowl when he was holding the trophy and he got the car keys and thinking that, this is a guy who's going to win 3 or 4 and is going to be a slam dunk Hall of Famer like his brother, probably end up with more rings than his brother.
I thought he would have more rings than Peyton.
Yeah, I figured 3 or 4, and Peyton would end up with the 2 that he got. But it didn't happen, and you're right. It is a shame because you look at his career regular season record, he's 500. And it really, when he won that second Super Bowl, he was well over 500 at that point. And it took his record to an area where fans who didn't follow him that closely obviously knew about the Super Bowl wins, but forgot about the games, the consecutive start streak, and just didn't get to see his professionalism on a regular basis like we did. They're like, hey, you had 2 great Sundays. Yeah, it was against Belichick and Brady, but you had nothing else. You're a 500 quarterback. I don't think you're a Hall of Famer. There are people like that around the country who just don't really get the other parts of what made Eli great. And I can understand that. Maybe if I lived in Albuquerque or Ames, Iowa, and I didn't do what I do for a living, I might feel the same way, to be honest with you. But because you and we saw it every week, and the fact that he was there to play every freaking Sunday, that meant so much to that team. And so many injuries he played through that he really didn't talk about and didn't reveal. And so no question to me, he's a Hall of Famer. And when it does matter who you beat in the Super Bowl and the way you played in big moments, he beat the greatest coach quarterback partnership in the history of the league twice. And with big drives at the end of those games. And those are tiebreakers to me. So if you're on the fence with Eli, to me, that should put you on the right side of it. And he is a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I mean, in the 100-year celebration for the Giants, I mean, anytime you're around any of the guys from the 07 team, the 11 team, guys that played on both, they'll all say the same thing. The 08 team was the best team of all of the teams that we were on. And Philadelphia could not – Plaxico Burress was – Giant fans of this era are conditioned to getting their – brains beat in by the Philadelphia Eagles twice a year. Now, this year they won a meaningful game against Philadelphia, earlier in the season, so that counts. But for the most part, a lot of their wins against Philadelphia, have been either the Eagles not needing the game, whatever. They haven't won in Philly since 2013, and that was Michael Vick starting the game, but then he got hurt, and Jimmy Clausen, I think, played most of the game for Philly. But if you go back to that 08 game, the Eagles have beaten the Giants something like 32 out of 36 meetings to that '08 playoff game. And Plaxico Burress was the difference in all that, because if you remember when Plaxico came to the Giants beat the Eagles regularly, right? I mean, even under Jim Fossil, under Fossil, remember in Giant Stadium, the divisional playoff round. And Plaxico Burress was the difference in that incident that happened, because remember, they had beaten the Cardinals in Arizona. They had beaten the Steelers in Pittsburgh. They had the number 1 seed. If they get past Philly, they're going to have Kurt Warner and the Arizona Cardinals coming into that stadium behind me on a cold, late January day. I like my chances of them getting to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I remember, Bob, after Plaxico accidentally shot himself, and a lot of the talk in the locker room and with Coughlin and the coaches was, we're going to be okay. We've got enough to overcome this. And I remember thinking to myself, you're not going to be okay. This guy's way too important. I can't imagine the Giants at that point winning the Super Bowl. Somebody is going to pick them off because they lost their most dangerous player on the outside, and a guy who was a huge part of, obviously, of the '07 championship, despite his own injuries at that point. So yeah, it just was, I forget what year it was, but I was at training camp and Coughlin said to me, we couldn't overcome it. And we were going to win it all that year. And I remember thinking, I can't believe he just said that. I had a tape recorder in front of him because he just doesn't say things like that. But I flashed back to when I guess the Giants felt like they had to say this at the time. We can overcome this, next man up, all the things that you say when you lose a key player. And
like the Broncos said with Bo Nix.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes you just can't overcome an injury that significant to a critical player. And that's what happened to the '08 team. So I'm actually thinking of writing a book about that 5-year period in Giants history from '07 to '11. And the '08 team, to me, is fascinating because it's a little bit of a Greek tragedy. And it's kind of been forgotten, but that team was dominating people. That team was ready to repeat. And you'd have a dynasty. 3 out of 5, to me, that's a dynasty, particularly in New York. And particularly if you're beating Belichick and Brady twice in that 5-year period. And so it's not a dynasty. It's a great period. You could argue, and again, if I write this book, I'll argue it, that it is the most glorious 5-year period in the history of the franchise. You can compare it to 86-90 and say, in 86 through 90, those teams had more combined wins. And maybe individually that 86 team was better, or maybe the 90 team was better. But who they beat franchises that combined lost their first 8 Super Bowl appearances or something to that effect in Denver and Buffalo. Whereas the 2 Super Bowl wins by Coughlin and Eli were against, again, the Patriots. So I think you can argue anyway, and I'm sure old timers will push back on another period in history, but those 5 years with the Giants were as glorious as any period they've ever had.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. They were good. They embodied what team was. I think back to that playoff game again with the number 1 seed, the Giants having the bye. Dominic Hickson returns the opening kickoff to midfield. Thought he might have broken it. And on the very first play of the game, they run the play that was the kryptonite to the Eagles defense. And I could still see it because from the press box at Giant Stadium, Giants were going from left to right, and they run Hickson on the Plaxico route, the deep ball down the right sideline. And you're thinking, man, they're going to hit him for a touchdown on the first play. That's the Plaxico play. And Dawkins comes flying over and blows up Hickson. And right there it was, and I think the Giants, 2 incompletions and they punted. So you went from like returning a kickoff to a touchdown, going to your bread and butter play with the understudy to Plaxico, but it's not Plaxico. Dawkins blows him up, and it was like, ooh, this is going to be a long day at Giant Stadium.
Your memory is a lot better than mine. So as you're saying, I'm picturing those images and being in the press box that day. But it was a bit of a Greek or a Shakespearean tragedy, and you'd have to tell me the difference between those two. But it felt like that team really was so dominant. And as you know, the '07 team was never dominant. They were dominant in the playoffs. They got hot. And the '11 team was 7-7 on Christmas Eve and Victor Cruz goes 99 yards against Rex Ryan, who is shooting off his mouth, of course, all week about what they were going to do to the Giants. And they never lost again. It's amazing that they were 7-7 in 2011 on Christmas Eve against the Jets, losing in that game early. And Victor Cruz goes 99 yards. I'll never forget it. And I Bleav Coughlin got wiped out in that game. He did.
He suffered a severe injury.
Tom told me a very severe hamstring and leg injuries that he didn't talk about much, and later did admit how much it hurt and how badly he was hurt. But I remember he dragged himself out onto the field to force Rex Ryan to shake his hand. And some people didn't want him to go out because he was hurt so badly. And he said, screw it, I'm going out there. He's shaking my hand. And I Bleav Brandon Jacobs said something to Rex Ryan on the field.
Oh, yeah.
Afterward.
They went at it.
Yeah. So
because the Jets had covered up all the Giants banners, because they had the walls painted of the Super Bowls, and the Jets had covered them all up, and the guys came in and ripped the curtains down, and the Jets put it back up after pregame warm-up, and they ripped it down again. It was crazy.
I think I remember that day John Maris said, well, we don't cover their Super Bowl trophies or banners, and it was his way of saying they've only won one, and it was a pretty good line that day, as I recall. But yeah, nobody had the Giants doing anything, even making the playoffs, and they got hot at the right time. And that's why I've always described Eli as opportunistic and a guy who played his best in the biggest moments on the biggest stage. And again, that's why to me, he gets over the line as a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, just one more about that 08 too. It was a revenge tour because they bristled at the fact that they were perceived as lucky. The Tyree helmet catch, and they weren't that great, during the course of the season. They were focused on dominating people and shutting everybody up. And remember, what was it? Baltimore came in and they were crowing about how everything not giving up a 100-yard rusher. And the Giants, I think, ran for 280 yards, but I think Bradshaw got hurt, so he stopped at 93. I think Ward had 94 and Jacobs had 86. And then that last game of the season, the second to last game of the season, that was for the number 1 seed against Carolina, the overtime game. And they put on an absolute clinic of running the football. And you said, wow, this may turn out to be one of the best Giants teams ever.
Yeah, and it's funny that was the only team that was ever really dominant during that period of Coughlin and Eli when they were at the top of their crafts.
That team felt like the 86 team.
Yeah, and
with more offense.
When you say revenge tour, it reminded me a little bit of the 07 Patriots after being caught with Spygate, and they decided to punish the league for questioning the authenticity of the entire Belichick operation. And they went out and just punished people and got to 18-0. Then, of course, we know what happened in Super Bowl 42. I'm not saying that the Giants were motivated maybe quite to that extent the following year, but there was something to that, what you just said. And it's a forgotten team. So if I do write this book, which I should know within the next week or two, then I really want to dig into that team and what happened and what could have been, because that was going to be a Giants dynasty. And if Eli has 3 rings, there's no question, and Coughlin too, they're already in the Hall of Fame instead of waiting maybe impatiently for their turn.
All right, so let's circle to now with John Harbaugh. As I told our audience and people on this podcast and other things that I host, you were at the forefront of all the reporting on this, and you won that story at every switch and turn. Now that the dust has settled and Harbaugh's kind of settled in, Monken is not coming, obviously. He got the head coaching job with the Cleveland Browns. But as he puts his staff together, what do you think his objectives are bringing the staff together to see his vision of what he expects this team to look like?
Well, the thing about John Harbaugh, he's known to be very good at assembling a staff, and good people want to work for good head coaches. So his staff will be very good. There's no question about that. Monken was a loss. They thought they were going to get him. They didn't Bleav he was getting the Cleveland job. I don't think anybody did. I'm not sure.
Most people didn't.
I don't think Todd thought he was getting the job, and then he got it. And I will say, when I saw that the Giants requested Davis Webb for an interview, I was like, okay, they know something. They believe now that Monken has a real shot to get the Browns job, and he did. So good for him. And Warhop, who was going to be the offensive line coach and Monken was really pushing him, and he was going to be the Giants OL coach. He's now off the board, so we'll see what the Giants do at that position. And yeah, the one thing is Harbaugh is a CEO type of coach, an overseer, a delegator. So when you're a coordinator with him, you have a lot of responsibility. And I think that's exactly what the Giants needed, was somebody who can come in and really be a CEO. As Darius Slayton said, a Coughlin-esque presence. So I think that Harbaugh matches up with that description. Slayton sort of spoke that into existence. I think there would have been two candidates who really fit that mold: Tomlin, who wasn't available because he's going to do TV, and Harbaugh. So the Giants got one of those two guys and gave him the power he needed and deserved and had earned over 18 mostly winning years in Baltimore with the Super Bowl. It's interesting that the Giants have never hired a coach who had won a Super Bowl already. So John is the first one who has accomplished that. You could argue, you could also argue for Dan Reeves, having gone to 3 Super Bowls, though he didn't win one, that Harbaugh is the most accomplished coach they've ever hired at the time of the hiring. So I think he'll have a very good staff. I like his hire at DC in Wilson. A lot of people thought it was going to be Leonard. I'm not sure that Leonard ever really had the lead on Wilson in that derby, but Denard Wilson will, I think, do a very good job for him. And we'll see how the OC thing plays out. But the Giants will be buttoned up, attention to detail, all the things you heard about the winning machine that Harbaugh put together in Baltimore. I think it'll be similar to Coughlin, maybe a little kinder and gentler than Tom, particularly in the early years. But it'll be that kind of approach. And to me, I don't know if you agree, Bob, but it's exactly what the Giants needed after 3 straight misses on novices as head coaches. And also Pat Shermer was 9-23 in Cleveland. And of course he was 9-23 with the Giants. They needed a head coach who had won before as a head coach. And obviously Harbaugh had done that.
Yeah. And I said to numerous people within the building, and when asked, or I've said it on this show, the New York Giants job is really not a starter job. It's not a learning on the job. Okay. Yes, it happened with Parcells way back when, but everything has kind of changed, right? In today's world. And Fossil had some success and he took a team to a Super Bowl. But if you look back over the last, 15, 20 years, the only elevated coordinator that's had any success in New York football, Giants and Jets combined, is Rex Ryan. All the other coordinator types that have been hired, the hot coordinator, they've all failed because, as you well know, having been covering this town and all the sports in this town, it's a little bit of a different animal. And there's a little bit more that comes with this job that can create a head coach angst, as opposed to, and this is not any disrespect, but if you're in Nashville or you're in some of these other places where it's a more collegiate feel, like, this is a different thing, and you better be able to handle that because that could seep into what you're trying to build as a program.
What's interesting is that Harbaugh wanted that right out of the gate. As soon as he was fired, he wanted this job. I talked to him shortly after he was fired by Baltimore, and he actually said to me, I think this is the job for me. And he wasn't really afraid of the New York media. And obviously Baltimore is a smaller marketplace, and he asked some about the criticism you face in New York, and I actually think it's overblown. There are more of us, right? So if in Baltimore you're getting hit from 6 or 7 angles, in New York it might be 17, but the criticism is basically the same. So at age 63, I think he should be able to handle that. We'll see. Only time will tell. That'll be an adjustment for him, just the magnitude of it. You saw in the press conference, he's looking out, and I think he just couldn't believe how many people were in the room. It was a pretty big room. And so
it was the field house.
It's a field house, right? And it was filled pretty much. And I think that it's an adjustment that he's seen it all in the league, and I imagine that he'll be able to handle it. And it's just interesting that he grew up in a football family that had a great appreciation. We spoke with Belichick or about Belichick and his respect for NFL history. The Harbaugh family is the same way. And he said the history of the league, a lot of it based in Ohio where he grew up, is very important to my family. And his dad said to him early in the process, John, it's the New York Giants. You're going to coach the Titans or the Atlanta Falcons instead of the New York Giants? And his son agreed with him. So the Giants were in the lead on this from day one, as soon as he got fired. In fact, I know that before he got fired, he looked and thought it was possible that Bisciotti would terminate him. He didn't think it was going to happen, but he knew it was possible. And he looked at the likely 6 or 7 openings, and obviously there were more, that would be available to him, and did a little unofficial ranking, and the Giants were number 1. So when it happened, when he got fired, he right away honed in on the Giants, and the Giants were on top of him because they were having discussions about Harbaugh before he got fired as well. So they were ready to go, and he was talking about picturing himself in Giants colors coming out of that tunnel a day or 2 after he got fired. So when he says he knew this was the job for him, I heard it from him on the phone. We were texting and he was saying things like that. And yeah, so it looks like a very happy marriage. Certainly there'll be a long honeymoon for him. If he goes 8-9, people will be very happy in year 1, but he's talking playoffs. He wants to go 10-7, 11-6, win a playoff game, and then make a run if possible. There will be no rebuilding. He wants to win right away. And I think Giants fans were happy, the ones I talked to, that finally we have somebody in this organization, a head coach, who was willing to say that on the record, that next year we want to make the playoffs. And I haven't met a Giants fan yet who isn't thrilled that he said that.
Oh, my God. I was in Hawaii last week working the Mitsubishi Electric Championship as the Champions Tour began. And
I'm jealous.
It was nice. But I couldn't get over the Giant talk there. That's all people wanted to talk about was Harbaugh, and with all due respect to the other guys that have been hired recently, it didn't have the same kind of buzz. It's funny that you mentioned that, because when we were talking about this before Harbaugh got fired, I was pushing for Mike McCarthy. And I had this big argument with my sons about the Giants need somebody that can walk in, put a resume down, and say, okay, I have a blueprint on over an 18-year career, how to win 61 or 62% of my regular season games, have a winning record in the postseason, go to Dallas, work with Dak Prescott, win 12 straight games, 3 years. And I know how to do this. Now, I think Harbaugh is probably better because of the discipline factor I think that he's going to bring to the table. But like I said to my kids, I said, do this exercise. I said, look up Tomlin, look up Harbaugh, look up Sean Payton, look up Mike McCarthy. Over the same period of time, they have about the same record, 61 to 63.4% regular season, around 500, a game above, a game below in the postseason with a lot of appearances, and they all got one Super Bowl win. And that the Giants needed that walking in the door, and they got their man.
Yeah, they did. And McCarthy's an interesting case. It's almost like a study in the way somebody presents himself, his image. And McCarthy comes across as a guy, somebody wrote this the other day, I'd credit the person, I'm sorry, that he is along for the ride. That was a perfect description of him. And yet he's not, because he developed a Hall of Fame quarterback. People forget Aaron Rodgers, when he fell in the first round of the draft, he still was a first-round pick. When he came out of Cal, he was very robotic. And his dropbacks, he would have the ball at his ear hole. And he was very robotic. And McCarthy loosened him up, made him a much more athletic player, and really developed him into a Hall of Famer, and never gets any credit for that. It's all Aaron Rodgers, and maybe to some degree rightfully so. But McCarthy did a lot of work with him early and turned him into a force in the league. And you look at his winning percentage. He goes to Dallas, and he's winning 12 games, 3 times. Now he's losing in the playoffs, but obviously Giants fans would sign up for that right now after what they've seen the last 14 years. So I think Harbaugh is at least slightly better than McCarthy. But if the Giants ended up with your guy, I actually would have been pretty happy with that, given what the numbers say about his ability as a head coach, what I know he did with Aaron Rodgers, the fact he won a Super Bowl, and he knows how to win 11 or 12 games on a fairly consistent basis. That sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, and I like the thing about Harbaugh that I liked even better is the discipline factor, as far as, because we all know about the Abdul Carter stuff and all, poor Mike Kafka, he inherits the interim job, and the first thing out of the gate is he's got to sit a guy for an opening series and then later sit him. I give Mike Kafka a lot of credit. I give him a lot of credit for doing that as a guy who was in a 7-game tryout. And, he drew a line in the sand. He's like, this is not going to be acceptable. We know Harbaugh is not going to accept any of that stuff. The other thing I was thinking about, Ian, just kind of in wrapping up here, even though Baltimore is a smaller market, listen to this, right? In the sense that he played in a marquee division. The Ravens Steelers, that was prime time. That was Sunday Night Football. Those were standalone games. And he played in a lot of big AFC games against the Patriots and against the Kansas City Chiefs and all this other stuff. And I was trying to say to friends, I was like, do you really think he's going to go to Tennessee? With all due respect to the AFC South, or with all due respect to the NFC South, and they have their own division rivalries, but it's not national. Baltimore-Pittsburgh was national. New England-Baltimore was national. Kansas City-Baltimore, national. And I think that was something that I believe made this job attractive to him as well, is that he's going to be playing national games with the New York Football Giants. And some of those other places, there's a lot of 1:00 Sunday games or the 4:05 game on Sunday. Those are not national matchups for the most part.
Hey, listen, if he became the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, the Tonight Show would not have already called his agent looking to book him. It's just, they want the head coach of the New York Giants, maybe not the head coach of and no offense to the Titans, but it's just, New York is different. It's a different place, and he wanted it, which is very important. I do remember saying to him, I think it was I want to say it was the Thursday after he was fired. I said, listen, if you want the best opportunity to win the division in year one, Atlanta gives you that opportunity.
Absolutely.
In the South, right? An 8-9 team just won that division. And right away he said, well, the NFC East, he basically, without saying it in these words, he certainly was not afraid of the NFC East. He talked about the teams, great respect for all three teams, but just was, he's a Harbaugh. He's not going to show fear of competition. And so right away, again, going on the record and saying, I expect to make the playoffs. That means you're either winning the NFC East or you're going in as a wild card with a 10-7 or 11-6 record. That's saying a lot. And that shows you that he is not afraid of anything about this division, embraces it, knows the history of Giants, Cowboys, Giants, Eagles, Giants, Washington. You're right. It's a national division. And I'm 61. Harbaugh is 63. You're probably in the same ballpark.
61, yeah, I'm with you.
Right? We all grew up with those matchups, and Parcells, Gibbs, and Parcells, Jimmy Johnson, and just great NFC East football on Sunday afternoon and now Sunday night, Monday night. And all that stuff did mean something to Harbaugh as he made this decision. And remember, Bob, and I had predicted this, he only was going to visit one facility. Tennessee was going to his house. If Atlanta had a meeting, they were going to his house in Baltimore. He was only going to one place, and that was the Giants. And that was because of the history of the franchise, what the Giants have meant to the NFL, what the history of the league means to the Harbaugh family, all that stuff. That's the reason he went to visit the Giants, because he knew they were different, and that's why he took that job.
Yeah, and if you just go back, like in Giants history, 84-90, I mean, the Niners, and you ask any of the players from that era, like the Niners were almost like a division opponent because they played in big games, whether regular season or postseason, every year, and that's what like the national brand brings to the table that you're probably not getting in those other places, those other markets. Ian, just to wrap it up, I'll give you a final word on this because, John Mara has taken a lot of arrows for the way a lot of things have gone here. And it's been hard on him, and obviously now dealing with the health issues. But I know how much he burns to win. I know how much this stuff has hurt him. I know that they've tried everything humanly possible to make it better, and it hasn't worked. As they went through this process, and Chris Mara, who has been unbelievably respected just from his time when he left the organization to run the scouting network that he did, a lot of teams in the league used his work. Like, he's respected football-wise. Just talk about what this hire and getting their man means for the Mara family, considering what they're going through right now with John and everything else.
Yeah, starting with Chris, when he left the organization, you're talking relatively early 2000s. That scouting service, I Bleav up to 15 NFL teams use that service.
Yeah.
And then he became the GM of the Arena League team in New Jersey. I Bleav they were the Gladiators.
Yeah. I was doing their games on Yes Network.
And I think his second year, they were pretty good.
Yeah.
So he re-enters the organization thinking he's got a shot at the GM job in 2007 when, of course, he retires. He doesn't get it. The Tisch family, and I actually agreed with the Tisch family on this. They decided it would be tough to have a Mara in there running football operations. He becomes an unfireable presence, maybe. And John had to tell Chris, this isn't going to happen. That was a very difficult conversation John had with his brother. But for the organization, it made the most sense to have Jerry Reese be the GM. And so Chris sort of fades into the background. He's still a very respected scout and evaluator. And then suddenly he's back in the spotlight. John, unfortunately, dealing with a health crisis. Chris is the one who became the lead in the chase of the recruitment of Harbaugh, meeting secretly at his house, and then at a second location between Baltimore and New York. I'm still not sure exactly where that was. But Chris was a bit of a closer on this one and did a lot of the work and set it up so actually John could be Mariano Rivera in the end, because John had to give the final blessing and also allow Harbaugh to report directly to him instead of to the general manager, which, as you know, Bob, was the traditional structure of the organization. I think John just being at the press conference, just what he's going through, just showed how tough he is, his resilience. And yeah, it's obviously been a very difficult struggle with cancer. And I just thought it was just very impressive that he could engage in the interviews during the process and then be there for the press conference. And it really said a lot about him and his toughness. You think of his grandfather laying out $500 to buy the team 100 years ago. And back then, really coming from nothing, the Maras didn't have much money in the Lower East Side and the whole beginnings of the franchise. And really, I think that blue collar work ethic has run through the family, even though they're rich people now. And I think John embodies that. And he showed that by being there, particularly at that press conference.
Ian, unbelievable reporting by you throughout this whole thing. Congratulations on the great work. I know you'll have a couple books come out of this whole thing, but we appreciate you joining us here on this edition of Bleav in Giants.
Well, Bob, you've had an amazing career. I'm very proud to know you from the start, and you're one of the best to ever do it. And so it was my honor and pleasure to be with you today. Thank you. Too kind, too kind. That's Ian O'Connor of The Athletic joining us on this edition of Bleav in Giants.